Is there anyone who would like to challenge or add to or argue with Noel? Anyone would like to comment on something which was particularly important at the table when you were discussing this issue? You are all the same people who were here before lunch, aren't you? Yeah, okay.
Too much lunch.
Okay. Well, you got your applause. I suppose that's feedback. Let's carry on to the third overall theme.
Our third theme was heritage and sustainable development. And this was quite a pleasant surprise to analyse, because I thought when we set this topic that everyone would spend their time talking for 45 minutes about trying to define what we meant by sustainable. You were all very, very restrained, and it was very good of you not to waste that time having that discussion, because of course the definition changes according to the circumstances, and it changes every time you have that discussion. So, question 7, the question was, if heritage is a non-renewable asset, what are the risks to it? And that was an interesting set of responses. I felt that we were on much safer ground here, that the whole discussion groups seemed to be more confident in discussing this question. And I think here we were in areas where perhaps we've done a lot more thinking individually and collectively before. So themes that emerge here, which emerge in the other questions in this topic as well, the idea of the need for prioritization, but also the idea of the need to get going. Don't sit thinking about everything and thinking that you can't do everything. You can't do a single thing until you have done everything. So we need a combination, in a sense, here of strategic approach, but also a bit of daring, a bit of entrepreneurship. We need some people working out the future economic structure of Europe, and we need some Richard Bransons actually going out and doing some enterprise here in the heritage world. Who would like to be the Richard Branson of the heritage world? So I think that idea of yes, plan, but also act. The idea that we are losing a huge amount just by sitting thinking about what we need to do next. And there is supposedly a Chinese saying that the longest journey begins with a single step, and I think that was coming through in many of the detailed answers. Also, though, a great concern about the balance between authenticity, the need to preserve what is authentic, what is genuine about the heritage, but also the need to adapt for the future, and linked to that, a very strong concern about perhaps an over-keenness to use clever new technology. This is something I sympathize with myself. Having used an Apple computer for the first time in my life today, it was a bit of a shock. And it's a good job that Steve Jobs is dead, or I'd be after him. So, sorry, that was unkind, but the concern here is with technology, and I think the concern is one which is very widespread. It's not just a heritage sector concern, that in our fascination with new technologies, that we actually become concerned much more with the medium in which we are communicating and the possibilities that medium offers than with what we were actually trying to say. And I think for many of us, again in the detailed questions, we were seeing a desire to keep life relatively simple. Don't build elaborate structures, don't build high technology solutions. These are difficult to maintain, they're difficult to explain, and usually they will be out of date within 2 years and nobody will come and repair them when they stop working. So, in a sense, a desire to decide what's authentic, what ought to be retained, what the true significance is of the heritage we work with, and to concentrate on that. And perhaps, I don't know if this translates into other languages, not to have so many whistles and bells, but to concentrate on what is the core importance of heritage. Right, next one, please. How can heritage be sustainably developed and, at the same time, protected? And again, this was a pretty straightforward, lots of answers on this. And I felt on this there was a huge range of thought here that was coming into this one. It seemed to engage people a lot more than some of the other detailed questions. And what I was seeing here was everything from a desire to have vision and leadership in the sector, people who are prepared to stand up, maybe take unpopular approaches and say, we must go down this path because the circumstances of the time, the nature of our sector demands it. People who are willing to stand up, make arguments, and perhaps be contradicted in public. So that vision thing, as somebody called it, that leadership business, up there, number 7 at the top. Also a recognition that although we are very much looking at renegotiating the roles of the various sectors of society, that the government cannot walk away, that governments do have responsibilities. They have to make sure that national systems of planning, development, strategic systems are in place. They have to make sure that legislative systems are in place. And they have to consider matters such as taxation. You can't have reductions in taxation if you also want the government not to be involved in heritage, because they just say, well, okay, that's fine, we reduce the tax somewhere else. You heritage people, civic society has taken over. So a recognition that we need to keep that breadth, the wide range of actors involved. Again, the idea of long-term planning and thinking coming up, and the idea of mobilizing all of the possible actors, the stakeholders as we call them in Britain, activating also the those who already have an attachment to the heritage. Work with the people who are already on your side, the local communities who are the custodians of the heritage. Make sure that heritage conservation, heritage preservation, heritage presentation makes sense in its own local context. It's no good having thousands of tourists coming to some European city of whatever if you don't explain to those tourists how that city relates to its own hinterland, to its own territory. It just becomes a stop on the travel itinerary. So that thought then of integrating what we do across all of society and indeed across all of space, if you like, all of the Earth's surface. And again, the word has occurred in other topics as well, balance. There are so many players here, there are so many interests. We need to balance, but at the same time, we need to be conscious that we, as a sector, are advocating heritage and heritage values. There are other people in society who will advocate different types of values. So we need to be strongly advocating what we see as the benefits of heritage, but at the same time being open to the idea that other people conceptualize value, conceptualize how society works in very different ways. There are people out there, I know you find it hard to believe, who really don't have very much time for heritage. And we need to work with these people, so we need to persuade them. We need to get them at least to agree to listen to our view of the world. That means that we have to listen to their view of the world. So we need a little bit less of the fundamentalist heritage approach and a little bit more of the collaborative heritage approach. And that's really what I extract as my final message from that one. And finally, on this cluster of theme, we have question 10, I hope.
Question 9.
Oh, have I missed question 9? I can't read my writing. Is that question 9? Yep. Again, themes, interesting questions, themes arising here, which also popped up in question 8, problems about authenticity, problems about the technology we're using, taking over from the actual core heritage interest we're trying to communicate. I think, again, I like question 7, which is look at heritage going forward. We can all generally agree that heritage is of interest because it comes from the past. But if we want to bring in the next generations, we're saying we want to look after this heritage, we want to hand it on to you, next generation, okay? So why does the next generation have to take that burden from us? How do we make our heritage, what we value, relevant to the next generation? And we need to involve everyone in that process. We need also to speak with those that we have to work with. We mentioned this under the last question too, that when one deals with an architect, he may not be particularly sympathetic to old buildings. He may like very shiny new buildings. We need to work with people to say, well, we have this set of values which we have. We also understand that you also have values. How do we compromise? How do we bring these together and multiply the benefits, get the right new fabric in our places, as well as preserve the important old? And I think that, again, drives us back to the question of prioritize. We can't preserve everything old. We must make decisions, and sometimes it will be difficult decisions. We may have to decide that certain buildings, we must allow these to go because we don't have the resources to preserve them, or because the master plan to provide the economic regeneration of an area requires a lot of new building to drive the whole economics of the conservation situation. Again, we must listen, we must explain. We hope that others with whom we work also will listen and will explain their views to us. If we do that properly, we will automatically raise awareness. If we have rational conversations with those with whom we find ourselves in disagreement, then hopefully we will advance together rather than spending a lot of our time arguing in the courts and the planning inquiries and lying down in front of bulldozers, which is something I'm getting far too old to do. And question 10, please. Question 10, I got the feeling that by the time we got to question 10, that a little bit of pre-lunch exhaustion had set in. But I think also question 10 was a very difficult question. And when I looked at this question, just when we were setting up the program, I thought, well, it's possible to answer that question. Which policies need to integrate heritage, and how can this be realized? And the answer to that, at one level, is simply all sectors need to integrate with heritage, and we need to use any possible means we can think of to make it happen. So that's a very simplistic answer. I think what we're seeing here, though, is, I think, one very creative idea. I really like the idea at the question, the answer 1 there. It's the idea that by working at the junctions where already are creative tensions between different sectors, that we may have the opportunity to insert heritage. When people are working in a situation where they are not totally confident of their own ground, perhaps when we're trying to combine ideas about urban planning with ideas about health and well-being of the population, where we have the architects trying to think about quite soft and fluffy things, and the social scientists trying to think about quite hard-edged and difficult and dirty and noisy things of buildings and building sites. It's in those areas where people are not quite on their safe territory that perhaps this is where we can go in with the heritage and say, well, actually, there's another aspect in here which may help to reconcile these competing objectives between the various sectors in society, particularly with regard to development. And again, the idea coming up here, which we've heard repeatedly, not just from me, it's in the questions, it's in the answers, the idea of prioritization. The idea of prioritization which is appropriate for the region, for the area, prioritization which will vary greatly between different types of heritage and the way in which you can make things happen. It's not just a question of prioritizing resources, it's also a question of prioritizing priorities for political attention, for civic action. You can't actually move forward on every single front at the same time. We must try to agree what it is that really matters about heritage and try to have some degree, I think, of consensus that we will concentrate. And the idea of having themes, whether it's a theme around a city or a theme around a particular topic, is, I think, a very, very powerful idea. And of course, we're here in the context, let's not forget, of the European Heritage Days. And the theme of letting people see inside what are normally closed doors, private buildings. It's a very, very powerful tool. If you want to win friends and influence new people, if you can give those people a feeling that they are getting something that is special, that is unique, that only a few people will get, they must take the opportunity every year. You will see behind that closed door what happens in that office block, what happens inside that educational building, what happens inside that factory. Don't underestimate the power of making people feel privileged. Heritage is a great privilege to be involved with it, to be able to work in that area, and if we can actually build on that idea that we have something special to offer, something which is a rare thing. It's not elitist to make people feel that they have received a special privilege. We need to balance this feeling and get the heritage opened out. We know what's inside that wonderful piece of architectural design, but most of the people who walk past it every day don't understand that. They just see a building with closed doors. So could we have a theme, a grand theme from all of what I've been summing up? I think the grand theme from all of what I've been summing up is to do exactly what this grouping does. open up doors. Open up doors in our minds, open up doors to work with other professionals, open up doors to new ways of looking at the heritage and new ways of preserving that which we wish to keep from the past.
Wow, thank you, Noel. Now, don't go away, because there may be someone who wants to argue with you. So, anyone who would like to add anything that you think has been missed? Gavi.
Thanks. I would like to add something to, I don't know which question it was. Heritage is a non-renewable asset. What are the risks to it? Because I do think this could do with a comment, because it's a very fundamental question regarding the disciplines we come from. Because as I am teaching planners, and very often I have to do with geographers and cultural geographers, they have a totally different approach to meta, meaning, place, and space. So what I would like to add is a question of methodology. Because of course we all know, and I keep saying it, that value and meaning is not intrinsic to the meta, but it is socially attributed, of course. So it is not the authority of the work that says what it means. So if you just scrape it a little, it won't cry. So indeed this is a social creation, all this meaning-giving process we have discussed so often. So who creates the meaning on what support? Is it the meaning of the meta, or the meaning of the story, or the meaning of the place? And this depends indeed very much upon the discipline you teach or the discipline you come from. And I think the criticism that I have to face very often, and many of you I suppose do that too, that we are all fetishizing substance. This is very frequently quoted, and I do remember that Dolores Hayden, even a very, very clever planning theorist, gave this comment on conservationists in America, fetishizing substance, to deal with this dictum, and to say that just because neither meaning nor value are intrinsic to the substance, I noted, the saying of the authority of the work has not to end, because if all meaning is socially attributed, I mean, there is no semantic fatigue to any monument. You can say whatever you want, it won't affect the life of the monument, but the meta is fatigable. So this is ending. And I think the misunderstanding between the idea of the social attribution of value and meaning, just beyond the question of meta, is very frequently used by politicians and in other disciplines. And we should face this. And I may repeat again, you can use up the meta.
Okay, thank you very much. Noel, would you like to comment on that? Is that something that you read in some of the stuff that was coming in as well?
Yes, I think there were several detailed comments which were along the question of the non-independence of heritage from the process of continual definition, redefinition, and attribution of meaning. I think that was very, very clear. And of course, there are good examples and bad examples. We have all seen very bad historical examples of meanings being forced upon heritages. So I think there is a very long tradition. But I think this is true, that people from different areas of specialism do approach the heritage in very different ways. The way in which a professional architect will very often approach an old building is very much to think about spaces, whereas many of my friends in the conservation world will think about surfaces and materials. Back to Gabby's point about materials. It's a different thing. It's a building for an architect may be an assemblage of spaces.
Right, so this whole question of integration and dialogue that we've been talking about also applies to the experts of the different sectors of the different disciplines.
We must make sure that we understand the languages in which we're trying to have a discourse, because we may be speaking different languages.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? Donovan?
This is not a dissent at all. It's just something that I want to pass on to our wonderful Polish hosts. I'm way too old for social media, but my young colleagues have forced me into using Facebook. So last night, coming back from the dinner, I went and wrote on my Facebook page that while the U.S. Congress and White House were chopping all funding for heritage conservation in the U.S., that last night the culture minister in Poland said 12 months ago, we doubled the budget for culture. And so I just put that on my Facebook. So here is the comment today of somebody who read this. The dedication of the Polish people to their heritage is truly an inspiration. If only we could discover why this is so and maybe learn something from their experience. So congratulations.
Wow, fantastic. Thank you. So we all need to become friends with you now on Facebook, Donovan. Yeah, there's another comment over there. You're getting your exercise in, Noel.
Thank you for all this brilliant work of bringing to our the result of all discussions. But I think we had also a plea to the European Commission, particularly, so to do all what's necessary to have, let's say, a very good research work that should be done in a long time, because you can't do this. We have a lot of facts and figures, mostly about economical aspects. But I think heritage is so important, and particularly now we have the Article 3.3 of the Lisbon Treaty, where the authorities are obliged to enhance cultural heritage. I think we need such a kind of, I should say, a comprehensive and comparative study over all Europe, not just about the economical aspect, but the environmental aspect, about the aspect also of human happiness, about well-being. I think these are kind of arguments we may help us to go much further with heritage. And this is an instrument we have to work upon. And this will take some time, but I think this is a condition upon getting on with heritage in a way that future is safeguarded. And I think also we might discover there what's the heritage at this moment for the younger generations. Because what they consider for the moment as heritage is also heritage that has to be safeguarded for the future. And we can't do this just like that. We need serious work, and we have given here this advice to the European Commission anyway and to the politicians, because this is an instrument they can use for their policy later on. I think we don't have this instrument for the moment.
Okay, thank you. Is there any support for that?
I think we have a proposition that heritage can seriously improve your happiness.
Yeah. Hold on, I'll go.
No, it's a short comment on the sustainability question. I think that the whole area of sustainability, that is the reuse of existing materials, buildings, etc., should be studied more thoroughly. So that's which we should integrate into this thing. But that leads me to a second comment, which is a collateral to this one, and that is internal medicine for our own people. And that is to say it shortly, we should be much clearer in our definition of what are monuments in the classical sense, which should not be changed, where authenticity and integrity should be almost 100%, to put it that way. And those buildings where change can be made within limits. I think that would help society in general. It would help ourselves, because we have a tendency to fall into some kind of a stew where we mix these things, and it makes things difficult for us, makes things difficult for the politicians, and it makes things difficult when we engage in cross-sectorial policy work. Thank you.
Thank you. There was quite a lot of comments that I saw coming in on various issues of we really need to know what we're talking about. We need to make decisions based on principles rather than just making decisions. We need to prioritize, but based on what we really think is important.
No, what I'm saying, to put it shortly and demagogically, is we need a two-pronged conservation policy. One, which is the old one, which we've always had, and then we need a new one, which is much clearer to what kind of changes we will allow to allow adoption of the old buildings. New buildings are fine, but not necessarily in the same place as the old. But to do that, we need to be clear on what can be done with certain buildings. So we need two categories in a way.
It's interesting in the nature conservation or landscape world that the categories of landscapes and wild landscapes are categorized from those which are strictly supposedly untouched and are to be remaining untouched, right through to living active landscapes where almost everything can develop. And the IUCN categories, I think of five with subcategories, from the do not touch through to the live in this landscape and enjoy it. it would be a really, if we could get something like that working for our heritage interests, I think it would be really powerful.
I would like to, I'd like to ask you for taking care about scale, which is a very important issue when concerning the changes in investment. We are now facing a lot of mainstream changes which are concentrated on very big scale changes, and the heritage is mostly middle or small scale, and missing that instrument to moderate scales in heritage sites is a very important problem in a way.
Okay, so I think that sums up some of the comments that you've had spontaneously. Thank you very much for that, and for giving us your attention, for looking at this wealth of results that we've had. Now, Noel, I know that there are 4 questions that you'd like to see a sort of show of agreement or disagreement in this room on this day with this group of people.
Right.
And so shall we kick off?
Let's go with this. You thought you'd answered enough questions for today. You've probably answered enough questions for the week. But I would like to ask you whether or not you agree or disagree with what I would call 4 big ideas. What we're thinking here is we would like to have some sort of almost a one-page summarizing of the big things we have learned, the big things we have discovered in this session. And I would like to put to you very, very quickly 4 ideas. And I just want to know yes or no, who agrees, who doesn't agree. So we'll do idea. Do you agree it's a good idea that we agree that generally, or do you think it's not a good idea and it doesn't come clearly from the discussions? Okay?
And just one other word of process. We're not going to be counting every single hand. We're going to be having a look at whether we have a lot of people saying they agree or a lot of people saying they don't agree, or about half-half. We're not a parliament, all right?
Okay.
Is that okay for everyone?
We're a trade union meeting, not a parliament, okay? Right. All of these questions are in the context of the European Days activities and related activities. Do we agree, 1, that all relevant actors should seek to balance the potential social, cultural, and economic benefits when using heritage as a resource? Do we agree or do we disagree?
If you agree, please raise your hand now.
And disagree.
Disagree?
Hey, good man.
Okay, anyone
Okay.
have no opinion? Oh, we're not asking that, are we?
No.
Okay, thank you. So a big majority of agreeing.
Okay, I
thank
think
you.
a good majority there. Our second statement, again in that context of European Heritage Days activities, do we agree that strategies should be developed for evaluating and demonstrating the positive economic and social benefits to local communities of conservation and access to the heritage? Can we agree that?
If you agree, please raise your hand now.
So strategies to evaluate and measure.
Keep your hand up, please.
Okay.
All right. If you do not agree, please raise your hand. Okay.
Good.
Thank you.
We're winning.
And the third one.
In the context, again, of European Heritage Days activities, do we feel that a community-focused approach has the potential to mobilize resources for sustainable heritage development, conservation, and access? So do we believe that the community-focused approach has that potential to mobilize resources?
If you agree, please raise your hand now and keep it up. Because we're waiting for translation, remember. So, all right. If you do not agree, please raise your hand. Okay. Thank you.
And finally, our last question is that one of the things we like to do with each forum is to give some guidance to the future work of the European Heritage Days activities. So, do we feel that the European Heritage Days programme should focus resources on increasing the European dimension, encouraging exchange, collaboration and cross-border event development with the object of promoting a vision of a common European heritage? Or I suppose if you want the converse of that, would you rather see it as more of a national, local thing, which is less emphasizing the European dimension.
Okay.
So do you believe in the European dimension as a key area of focus in the EHD program or not? Those
So
who believe...
who agrees that we should be focusing the resources on the increasing the European dimension? Please raise your hand now. Oh, okay. If you do not agree, please raise your hand. Okay, that's interesting.
Still a majority, but not such a big
majority. No, but there are a lot of people who are saying no.
Yeah, we have a question mark.
Yeah, all right, thank you. Perhaps... So how do we balance the needs of the local communities with looking at the European big top?
Okay, so Chris's argument here is that you start with the grassroots and you don't worry too much about the continental scale. Yeah?
All right, thank you.
We note.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
So with that, I think we have managed to put a mountain of input on your plate to give us a couple of words of summary, Paulina. But
yes.
if you would like to close, thank you.
Okay, so we are quickly arriving to the final remarks. I do hope that you found this debate and this day, this conference, quite interesting, and that you have the feeling that you had the opportunity to really take part in it. I think that our aim was not to discover whether heritage had value in terms of economy or not, because we are all either sure it has, or at least have a feeling that it must have some economic potential. But thanks to those speeches we heard today and the discussion that followed it, we learned how to actually distinguish and how to measure this economic value, at least in a way. I think what is also very important that we've discussed how important it is to know the history. You cannot have heritage without the context that's the social, the historical, the whole context that surrounds the heritage, and but most importantly creates our collective memory. So and builds our common identity. And this has to do a lot with the European dimension we have been talking so much about, and I think that we managed to incorporate the idea of the European Heritage Days more in this forum, which was our initial aim, to have it strictly linked with the whole idea of European Heritage Days and show the deep sense of this program.